Hello, everyone. It is Scott Matla and Laura Seba with Locked On Canadiens. And Laura, we are approaching the trade deadline. We are 3 weeks away, give or take. And I suppose the biggest question is now, who is the biggest trade chip for the Montreal Canadiens going into the deadline? Tyler Toffoli is already gone, and there's no shortage of names. Who do you think is the biggest piece in Kent Hughes' arsenal going into March 21st?
I think a case could be made for Artturi Lehkonen. I definitely think he's a major trade chip given his versatility, his ability to play in a lot of lines and in a lot of situations. I definitely think that he's high on the list, but right now, as he's finding his game back, I think Jeff Petrie has to be the biggest one because he's come back like this. The season has been really rough on him. He did come back from a really hard injury, difficult injury. And then now under Martin St. Louis, he's finding his game back. He's getting a lot of joy in playing hockey. He's doing correct things again. He's a really high caliber defenseman. I know it sounds crazy. He's a really high caliber defenseman that a lot of teams need. And he's fast and he's good defensively. He's good offensively. He does have the occasional brain fart, but honestly, he's definitely the kind of guy that you want on your team as a defenseman, it doesn't even matter. Like in Montreal, he's a number one. On a contending team, he's not going to be that. So I really think that Jeff Petrie, given the term that he also has, I think he's the biggest Canadiens bargaining chip.
Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders here, approaching the trade deadline, looking at the biggest trade chips the Islanders have. The two most obvious are Zdeno Chara, who is a veteran defenseman, a former captain, a Stanley Cup winner who could provide leadership for another team, although he probably wouldn't bring in a lot. And then forward Zach Parise, who has played very well over the last few months, also has a lot of experience and can be a versatile player for a number of other teams. But if the Islanders are in a gambling mood, younger players like Scott Mayfield or Anthony Beauvillier might bring in a bigger return, as would Josh Bailey, but it would be difficult for another team to accept Bailey's high cap hit at this stage in his career. The problem with giving up on players like Mayfield and Beauvillier, they're still young, they're still relatively inexpensive, and it may be something that Lou Lamoriello would not want to do, but those players would bring in an even bigger return for the Islanders if they were to somehow pull off a trade. I think that if Lou Lamoriello was going to deal one of those younger players, he would have to be bowled over by the offer made by the other teams. For more, watch or listen to the Locked On Islanders podcast with me, Gil Martin, wherever you get podcasts.
Okay, everybody. Chris and Kyle back again from Locked On Avalanche, and we've established that the Avs are buyers, but who are they going to have to give up to get kind of these players that we've been talking about on their roster? Who would you think is maybe like their biggest trade chip that they have for the trade deadline?
Andre Burakovsky's got a championship pedigree. He was on the Capitals when they won the Cup. But when you're looking at production, you can easily offload Tyson Jost or JT Compher because they're just not meshing right now with the team. So maybe you could package that with a draft pick or somebody in Loveland with the Colorado Eagles and maybe get something for that price.
Yeah, because this is where it's going to get tricky for the Avalanche because they don't have a lot of draft picks to give up. They've given some up for trades in the past for kind of current players. So they're going to be dipping into future seasons drafts if they want to do that. And yeah, outside of Burakovsky, who I don't genuinely think they want to trade, but he is an unrestricted free agent going into next year. So it is a possibility that they do, but I don't think they want to. And would you consider JT Compher and Tyson Jost like big time trade chips? Not really. So you're looking at kind of the Avalanche prospect pool, which is very good, to maybe have to give up some of those guys. And do the Avs want to do that? That is the big question. You know, they want to bring guys in, but they're going to have to give up some guys maybe that they don't want to in their prospects. So it is going to be an entertaining trade deadline to watch for Joe Sakic. And
the Florida Panthers, with the season that they've had, they are in position to buy this trade deadline. And when you buy, sometimes you have to part ways with things that you might not want to part with. And some of the biggest trade chips for the Florida Panthers ahead of the trade deadline are Owen Tippett, who's played in a middle six role. Sometimes he's been able to play on the top line for the Panthers, but just hasn't shown that production that he's been hyped up to be with 14 points in 42 games. But ever since he's been sent down to the AHL quite a few times, he's averaging over a point per game in the AHL. So maybe things that he might need to clean up in his game a little bit if Owen Tippett does in fact need a change of scenery. Another trade chip that the Florida Panthers could use is Grigori Denisenko, another former first-round pick. Only played one game in the NHL this season, but has spent most of his time in AHL Charlotte. Not such a good season, AHL Charlotte. 18 points in 30 games and a plus-minus of -6 down in Charlotte. So maybe a change of scenery might be great for Denisenko, as well as he's been having a hard time adjusting his game to the U.S. game. So that would be a valuable trade chip for the.
What's up, everyone? This is Jack Bushman from Locked On Blackhawks, and the biggest trade chip that the Blackhawks have as we approach the NHL trade deadline is undoubtedly goaltender Marc-Andre Fleury, but it comes with a catch. There are a lot of variables that go into place when trying to trade Marc-Andre Fleury before the deadline. First and foremost, he has a 10-team no-movement clause that is in effect. And also, when the Blackhawks first acquired Fleury from the Vegas Golden Knights, he was told that he would have a final say in the matter about where he wants to go. There was actually a rumor that came out recently from Chris Johnston on Insider Trading that said Fleury is currently leaning towards staying in Chicago. I hope that's honestly not the case, though, because Fleury undoubtedly is the Blackhawks' biggest trade chip and their best chance at netting a first-round pick. They don't have one right now because of the trade that Stan Bowman made in the summer to acquire Seth Jones. And it would be a real backbreaker to the Blackhawks if Fleury does not want to be moved, because they just entered a rebuild. They need to start thinking about the future more and more. And without a first-round pick, plus a pretty limited prospect pool, that would put a little bit of a damper on the mood. So even though Fleury is the biggest trade chip for the Blackhawks as we approach the deadline, things could get hairy because he will have his final say in the matter that could affect the way things go and could affect the future of the Chicago Blackhawks. For more coverage on the Chicago Blackhawks as we approach the trade deadline, be sure to check out the Locked On Blackhawks podcast.
All right, so the trade deadline is right around the corner, like we've been talking about on this podcast, on any podcast you might be listening to. It's no secret. Trade deadline is here. It's huge. And St. Louis Blues, like I've talked about, like Tommy's talked about, need a defenseman. There's no secret there. But the question is, when you're a team as successful as the St. Louis Blues, what goes out the other way? You know, if you're going to acquire a big fish player, you need to send something the other way. And if you're contending like the St. Louis Blues are, you really don't want to disrupt your roster too much. So a couple names come to mind. Only got about 60 seconds here, so there might be some hot takes. Big one, Billy Husso. If Jordan Binnington continues to play well like he has as of late and kind of reassume that starting role, Billy Husso becomes expendable. Billy Husso has been spectacular for the St. Louis Blues this year, but if he's your backup goalie, you might be able to trade him. Another guy that comes up, Marco Scandella, you throw him on. He's had a really poor season. Add him onto a trade. Could be enticing for some teams. Again, if you're trying to get a defenseman back, it might be difficult. Another guy, Oscar Sundqvist, hasn't really remained healthy this season. Somewhat the odd man out in lineups. Another guy that could attract some big fish players. And then if you're looking at, prospects, obviously do not disrupt the roster. Scott Perunovich, if he gets healthy. Klim Kostin has kind of found himself out of the lineup at times, on the fourth line at times. Again, sort of the odd man out. And then obviously some picks. So should be a wild trade deadline for the St. Louis Blues.
This is Ian McLaren of Locked On Boston Bruins, here to say that the biggest trade chip that Don Sweeney has in his arsenal is the guy who has made a public trade request, that being Jake DeBrusk. He is still very young. He's a very talented scoring winger, and he should fetch a decent return, if not a player for the present, then perhaps a draft pick or a prospect that could help down the road. You could look at top prospect Fabian Lysell as the biggest trade chip the Bruins have, but I think most fans would consider that a disappointment, trading away a key piece of the future in order to try to salvage the current window that is fairly closed at this moment. They also have a first-round draft pick that they could jettison, but that probably falls under the category of Lysell. You want to make the team better in the present without having to sacrifice too much of the future. So that would probably leave Jake DeBrusk and the likes of Jack Stanika and Urho Vakanainen as Boston's biggest trade chips ahead of the March 21st trade deadline.
Hello, this is Dan Holme from Locked On Capitals, and the Washington Capitals' biggest trade chip going into the trade deadline shouldn't come as any surprise. I think it is Ilya Samsonov. There is rumors out there that the Montreal Canadiens would be interested in Ilya Samsonov. Ilya Samsonov is a goaltender who has struggled all season long, and the Capitals need to upgrade in that position. And not only Ilya Samsonov, I think that you could probably part with Hagelin and possibly Phoenix Copley as well. Phoenix Copley is a goaltender that's been in the Capitals organization for some time and has struggled to surpass that level of an AHL goaltender. What is the big plan for Phoenix Copley? I'm not entirely sure there, but I would say Phoenix Copley, Ilya Samsonov, and possibly Carl Hagelin could be some players that the Washington Capitals would like to move on from. I know that Hagelin has had some luck with Hathaway and Dowd, but I think that they have some depth in Hershey, and that would also free up some cap room as well. But the biggest takeaway from that is Ilya Samsonov. The Capitals have got to upgrade in net. There's some big names out there, Marc-Andre Fleury, and another familiar face to the Washington Capitals, Braden Holtby. I think that the Capitals would love nothing more than to bring their hometown Stanley Cup winning goaltender Braden Holtby back to the district.
As we approach the NHL trade deadline, there is no question that the Arizona Coyotes' biggest chip is Jakob Chychrun. Hey everybody, this is Carl Pavlak, co-host of Locked On Coyotes. Jakob Chychrun is undisputably the biggest player that the Coyotes have to offer at this year's draft. He is only 23 years old. He is signed for the next 4 years at just $4.6 million. He has been having a bit of an off season, but it's his first year as a number one defenseman. Just had a first year adjusting to new line mates, so he's taking a bit of time to kind of right himself. But everyone knows that Chychrun is the type of player who is going to stay with the franchise for the future. If teams want him, they're going to need to put up a first round pick, a prospect, blue chip prospect, and a player. That is what Bill Armstrong has stated is the asking price. It's a steep one. I don't know if anyone's going to make it, but if they want to get exponentially better with a great defenseman like Chychrun, they're going to need to pay a heavy price. For more on this, make sure to follow Locked On Coyotes.
Injuries may have changed how the Blue Jackets are approaching the trade deadline. I'm Jay Foster of Locked On Blue Jackets. The Columbus Blue Jackets' biggest trade piece has kind of shifted a little bit in the last week or so, with Jonas Korpisalo being added to the injured reserve list, and we don't know when he's going to be back. He was kind of our biggest piece. He was the piece that I had kind of pegged from the start of the season to move at the trade deadline. With him basically out of commission, he hasn't had a very good season numbers-wise, so we kind of turned to Max Domi, who is the club's other unrestricted free agent. He's got 27 points in 48 games for the Blue Jackets this season. He's having a much better season this season than last season, and he's the kind of player that teams love to pick up at the deadline. He's gritty, he's got a lot of energy, he can provide some secondary scoring. He's not going to be a game changer for a lot of teams, but I think with the right team, he could be a very, very smart depth pickup for, say, a team like a Toronto. or a Calgary, or a team that needs a little bit of secondary scoring. So there's my pick for the Blue Jackets. Big trade piece, but they may not move anyone. We'll have to find out how the trade deadline goes on March 12th.
What's up, everyone? It's Mike DeStefano and Dave Morisuti, your host of the Locked On Leafs podcast. Just a few weeks left until the NHL trade deadline, and now we're going to kind of talk about what the Leafs have to offer. Dave, I'll let you go first. Who are the team's best trade chips right now for Toronto?
I mean, everyone's going to look, if you're trying to get a player, the draft pick capital is going to be the one thing every team will want included. The Leafs obviously have their first round pick going for this year's draft in the second rounder. After that, they don't really have as many draft picks afterwards. So I think the draft capital the prospect capital, is where most teams are going to be looking to maybe have the Leafs throw in something to add a little more value to a trade.
Yeah, they got a couple of guys, Matt Nyes, Robertson, who's up with the big club right now, Topi Niemela. There are some players who I think hold some significant trade value, but I disagree. I think it is the draft picks themselves. You take a look at, they were able to keep their first round pick when making a move. They were able to keep the second round pick while also moving out a guy like Nick Ritchie in that contract. I think draft picks are going to be the number one currency at the deadline, as they always are. Teams always want that lottery ticket, and that's exactly what a draft pick gives them. So I think that first rounder is going to be dangled for a top four defenseman, so we hope, or a good player at least. And I think that we'll see a sizable deal come down here over the next couple of weeks for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But we'll be breaking it all down. We'll be breaking down the wishes, the wants, and what they got all over at Locked On Leafs.
What's up, Lightning fans? Adam here from Locked On Lightning, here to tell you about some of the trade chips that the Lightning might be dishing out with this upcoming trade deadline. Now, General Manager of the Tampa Bay Lightning, Julien BriseBois, has made it very clear that he doesn't really intend on making any moves at the trade deadline, given that all the pieces that the Lightning have right now are pretty solid from top to bottom, as well as with cap constraints. It doesn't look like the Lightning will be making any moves in the foreseeable future unless an injury happens in the coming weeks. Now, if the Lightning were to make a move, there's two top players on this team that you might see move on the off chance that there is a deal taking place. That is Taylor Radish and Cal Foote. The chances of the Lightning dishing out some trade picks is probably unlikely, given that they don't have a pick till the 5th round of this year, and that their pick for next year in the 2023 draft doesn't look as valuable as enough to bring in a good piece. So look out for that if in the upcoming trade talks. Also, the Lightning are not looking to move any of their prospects. Dylan Duke, a recent draft pick in this past draft, as well as Jack Finley from 2 years ago. Even though those are high-priced picks in the Lightning system, the rest of the league doesn't think so as much. Doesn't take away from the fact that they are high quality players. So even though the Lightning probably won't make a deal in this upcoming trade deadline, those are your trade chips for the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Hi, this is Rachel Donner from the Locked On Flyers podcast. I'm here with Russ Cohen, and of course, the biggest deal on the table for the Philadelphia Flyers is longtime captain Claude Giroux. I'm already sad about it, but I think at this point it's kind of a done deal that he's going, and very likely to Colorado, but there could be other teams out there in the mix. I think the most important thing at this point is that we get the best return on Claude Giroux. Russ, what do you think that is?
Yeah, I think they should focus on a defenseman. You do need to get a defenseman, an NHL-ready defenseman, even if that defenseman's not in the NHL this year, one that you expect to be in the NHL next year, someone who could play conceivably in the top 4. Like, that's a necessity. Then I would look to get a center, because, again, I don't think the Flyers are very deep at center. And it doesn't have to be a first-line center. You're not going to get anybody like that, especially as a secondary piece, but somebody who could play at least third-line center in the future, or second-line center if they reach their zenith, and another pick. If I could do that, that's fine. If it's going to be, a first and a second, then that other piece needs to be an NHL defenseman. It has to be, because they have so few defensemen. Even if they trade for them with their cap issues, this defenseman's going to have to be somewhat low cost as well.
Yeah, I'm with you mostly there. I would prefer the first round pick, a high level prospect, no matter what the position. I want the best available from that team. And then for a third piece, I want either a defenseman, like you're talking about, that would be a depth defenseman for the Flyers, or somebody that could at least backfill some of what Claude Giroux was doing for the remainder of this season. And hopefully both of us get what we want for in this deal, because again, we are very sad to be losing Claude Giroux this trade deadline, and we're going to wish him well wherever he goes.
Yeah, I covered the guy's whole career. I covered his draft. I covered his first Phantoms game a lot.
Hey friends, this is Harrison from Locked On Winnipeg Jets. We are talking about the trade deadline and specifically what Jets players might be on the move. There are some very good candidates for who might get shipped out. The first name that everyone's going to circle to is Andrew Kopp. Now, Andrew, for me, is probably among the TDL candidates Winnipeg's biggest trade piece. You've got a guy who's a super versatile middle six player, but he has top six, maybe even second line production. He has a gritty physical game. He can be a useful PKer. So I think in a lot of respects, he is the kind of team player that most squads are looking for. And if the Jets were to get like a first plus maybe like a B prospect or something, I think that that's a really good start. And I think the Jets would be pretty pleased with that. As far as other big trade deadline guys, Paul Stastny might get you a second rounder, maybe a third rounder if you retain some salary. And then Nate Beaulieu on the back end, if the Jets could find a taker for his services, maybe, for like a third or a fourth round pick, I think that would be sensational for the Jets and an extremely successful outing, especially for a team that, is starting to think about retooling for the future and could really use a few extra assets once the 2023 draft rolls around.
Welcome inside a quick-hitting trade deadline special of Locked On Senators. I'm Ross Levitan alongside Brandon Pillar discussing who the biggest trade chip is for the Sens going into the trade deadline, and in silent protest of wanting to re-sign Nick Paul, we're going to go between the pipes.
Yeah, Ross, I think goaltender Anton Forsberg is the Ottawa Senators' biggest trade deadline chip because a lot of teams are going to be looking for goaltender depth in the playoffs. Colorado's been burned by that before. Edmonton's looking for a goalie, and a lot of good reasons to get Forsberg. He's on an expiring deal. He's making less than $1 million, and he's playing like a number one lately.
Only 7 goalies in the National Hockey League have a better save percentage than Anton Forsberg since December 2nd. So the sample size is 17 games long, and one of them is his partner, Matt Murray. So both Senators goalies have played exceptionally well, but they got him off waivers last year. So to turn that into a draft pick would be huge. What kind of return would you expect for Anton Forsberg?
I would expect the Senators could acquire a third-round pick in return, depending on how desperate teams are, and he's one of the best goalies on the market. So I think definitely you're looking for a mid-round draft pick here.
But which draft would they target? The Senators have 2 second-round picks and 3 third-round picks in the 2022 draft. So my guess would be they look ahead to 2023. They also have Zach Sanford, who's a guy we know teams covet, that Stanley Cup experience. He was on the 2019 St. Louis Blues, so we wonder if there could be a fit elsewhere for him, maybe to his hometown, Boston Bruins. We'll keep track of that as we lead up to the trade deadline. You can follow us on Twitter at SenCentral and stay locked on Senators wherever you download your podcasts. We've got your team every day.
Hey everybody, Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, looking at trade chips that the Wild have in their arsenal if they want to try to make a move for a center or otherwise at the trade deadline. Now, the Wilds obviously have a pretty good core of prospects. Marco Rossi, Matt Boldy, Jesper Wallstead, some of the big ones that come to mind. Now, there's not going to be a spot for everybody in the prospect pool to play on this roster. So that's where things kind of get interesting is, do the Wild maybe try to dangle somebody like Adam Beckman to get a player in return? If they were to do that, obviously would want somebody that was around for more than just the rest of this year. But beyond that, plenty of depth in the defenseman pool as well. Maybe not Carson Lambos, but some of those guys that are a tier below him in the Wild's system. And of course, they will have a first-round pick to dangle as well. So the Wild should have plenty to have in the prospect pool to dangle. And I would say that probably their best chip, if they choose to use it, would be Adam Beckman. For more on the Minnesota Wild, make sure to follow Locked On Wild wherever you listen to podcasts.
If the Los Angeles Kings are looking to make a move, well, their biggest trade chip lies in the AHL. I'm Sarah Avampado, host of Locked On Kings, and if I were Rob Blake and I were looking to make a splash at the deadline, well, the Kings have one of the top prospect pools in the league. Quentin Byfield and Brant Clark have already been deemed untouchable, but that leaves a lot of other guys who could be included in a package deal to land some significant help. For teams looking for NHL-ready players, well, the Kings have a whole bunch of guys stashed down in the American League who could make an impact right now on someone else's team. They've got Gabe Vilardi, Alex Turcotte, Jared Anderson-Dolan, and Rasmus Kupari all playing in the AHL. All have gotten NHL time in the past and can hold their own in this league. And landing a player like, Travis Konecny, Jake Chychrun, anyone of the caliber the Kings would be looking for to add would come at a significant cost to the team. But a combination of picks, NHL-ready players, prospects further down the developmental line, and maybe a random fringe player or two for fun, well, that could maybe get the job done. But no, seriously, you can't have Quentin Byfield. If you want to hear more about the Kings leading up to the trade deadline, make sure you check out Locked On Los Angeles Kings wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, what is going on, Ranger fans? It's John Schick with Locked On New York Rangers here to talk about what could be the biggest trade chip, or trade chips as it were, pertaining to the New York Rangers as far as players who could potentially be traded away from the Rangers in return for something that the Rangers need as they hopefully continue their march to the playoffs here. And I gotta say, for a Ranger team that's in position to obviously be buyers this season for the first time once again in about half a decade, they do have a somewhat surprising amount of players who could potentially be traded away from the team. I think you got to start with Alex Georgiev. If there's a goalie-needy team that is trying to make the playoffs or seems to be in good positioning for the playoffs, I think they could come calling. Alex Georgiev played very well earlier this season when Igor Shesterkin was unavailable, and Georgiev does tend to struggle when he's not getting regular playing time, which obviously when Igor's around, he won't. Vitaly Kravtsov, he has a very chilly relationship with the Rangers, enough said, but he is a former top 10 pick and a exciting young player. Philip Heedle's been a healthy scratch recently. There's some rumors that maybe the deal is already in place as it pertains to Philip Heedle. Nils Lundkvist is somebody as well. As far as what the Rangers need in return, as I mentioned in our other Locked On Now video, they need a middle six forward, at least one, maybe two, and some secondary scoring. I think that's what the Rangers would be looking to get in return, and I don't think the Rangers are going to trade a ton of their top A-plus prospects, guys that have a big future with this team going forward, but I could see them moving on from some of these, other prospects, guys that don't really necessarily have a role with the team right now, in exchange for some help, once again, as the Rangers continue their push to the playoffs, and I think that that's what they should absolutely look to do, but that's pretty much it for now. Make sure to check out the next episode of Locked On New York Rangers.
Joe DiBiase from the Locked On Sabres podcast. The Sabres are probably not going to do anything major at the NHL trade deadline coming up in a couple of weeks. But I think one guy that maybe you want to keep an eye on, I wouldn't expect him to be traded, but I wonder whether or not it's possible that he could be traded, is forward Victor Olofsson, having a down season, his worst goal-scoring season by far of his NHL career. But he had 5 goals in his first 8 games, only 2 goals since, one of which being an empty netter. A wrist injury at the end of the month of October really derailed his season, and I do wonder if NHL teams will give him the benefit of the doubt, look at him as the proven goal scorer that he has been in his young NHL career, and they will give him a bit of a pass and say, yeah, I want that guy for the playoffs, goal scorer, specialty player on the power play. He doesn't do a ton for you outside of his shot. He doesn't carry the puck, he doesn't play very well in his own end, and he doesn't generate a lot of play, but the guy can shoot the puck. He's got an elite skill, and he's great when it comes to the power play. And a team like, I want to say the New York Rangers that are going into the playoffs, maybe looking for a little extra goal-scoring punch, I think he's someone of value. Why would the Sabres want to do it? Well, arbitration. He's going to be going to arbitration this coming offseason, or at least he's a candidate to go to arbitration. New contract. He's going to be a restricted free agent. He's going to be 27 years old. I'm not really sure if he's a part of the long-term future here in Buffalo. It's kind of a sell low, and that kind of stinks because, again, his worst season, goal-scoring-wise in the NHL, the time to trade him was probably a year or 2 years ago. But do you want him a part of the future? Is he too old for what you're building right now? Do you think you could capitalize on his value right now, and do you not want to deal with the contract talks that you're going to have to do in the offseason? I think Victor Olofsson is an interesting name to watch for the Sabres heading into the trade deadline.
Hey everyone, it's Kyle Demetrius of Locked On Sharks, joined by JD. Buddy, the Sharks are going to be sellers again at the deadline. What's their biggest prize possession they can dangle out there for other teams?
Not only their biggest prize, but I would argue the biggest prize in the NHL. Tomas Hertl, an elite 1C that just aren't always available for, especially at a cost of under $6 million that Tomas Hertl is. Hertl, 20 at the time of recording this, 22 goals and 18 assists for 40 points on a very, very offensively challenged team. And the Sharks, if they really, really want to start their rebuild, trading Tomas Hertl could be that thing that really kicks off the rebuild for them. And teams should be lining up around the block to try to acquire Tomas Hertl because he could be that piece that puts you over the edge.
And the secret sauce in all of this is that the Sharks can retain some of that contract. So if Florida wants him, they can really get him for like $2.5 million, $3 million. It would be nice little addition to any cup contender. So keep it locked to the content, boys, where we'll have all of your trade deadline coverage. Locked On Sharks, wherever you can find your podcasts and YouTube.
Howdy there, hockey fans. This is Dane Lewis with the Locked On Stars podcast, here to give you a little bit more insight on the trade deadline as it pertains to Texas's favorite hockey team. The biggest trade piece for the Dallas Stars going into this crazy deadline season is, of course, defenseman John Klingberg. The 29-year-old wants a big 8-year deal around $67 million, but the Dallas Stars are not really seeking to accommodate that deal, just looking to sign some other bigger names down the road, whether that's Jake Ottinger, Jason Robertson, Roope Hintz, what have you. So John Klingberg has expressed interest in getting traded from the Dallas Stars. It hasn't happened yet, but I feel like it's very likely that we could see him get dealt before the trade deadline on March 21st, because he is likely going somewhere else once the season ends if he stays here in Texas. And I think the Stars would want to get some kind of return for a player of John Klingberg caliber. He's been a fantastic offensive defenseman for the Stars team pretty much ever since he arrived on the scene. He's been a fantastic playoff player, a huge performer in the postseason for the Stars, and I think he could really come up big for a team that's looking to round out their defensive core, especially out east with teams like Carolina and Florida. I think best case scenario, though, as far as a return package, the Stars maybe get a first-round pick, maybe a prospect or two, and then maybe an additional draft pick that's in the second, third round, something like that. Nothing too crazy. I don't expect the Dallas Stars to be making the biggest, flashiest headline news this trade deadline season, but I think if they do, it will probably involve number 3 defenseman John Klingberg. If you want more information on the Dallas Stars and all their trade line endeavors and all their endeavors throughout the rest of this hockey season, be sure to check out the Locked On Stars podcast, hosted by yours truly, Dane Lewis, hosted every Monday through Friday, every weekday, wherever you get your podcast at.
Hello everyone, it's your girl Jess Belmosto from Locked On Calgary Flames. Hope you're having a great day today. The Flames need to upgrade their blue line for the Stanley Cup run to become legitimate. You know, letting up 7 goals against Vancouver, who have been historically bad this season, and then turning around to let up only 3 goals against the Wild, but also that was only 23 shots. So something needs to happen here. And I think that John Klingberg is someone who can make that happen. He is a 29-year-old who is in the last year of his contract, who is not looking to re-sign an extension with the Dallas Stars. He has a cap hit of $4.2 million, and I think that he is someone who would easily boost the defensive core in Calgary. I think, you know, it would be obviously a rental. I don't think that they have really much need to re-sign him. I think that they can do something in free agency, and they can just he's a true difference maker. You know, you see what he's done in Dallas. You see how many teams want him. You know, the true contenders are looking for this guy. Tampa Bay, Carolina, Florida, New York Rangers, who were kind of on the cusp of the playoff spot, and of course, Calgary's linked as well. So a 4.25 cap hit, you know, but, you know, trade Dylan Dubé, Valimaki, and you know what, maybe if we're feeling a little generous, we look to help them and give them some Sean Monahan. I think that this is something we could do. Or you just do Sean Monahan and Valimaki and maybe a draft pick. I don't know, but let's not overpay for it and look back in 2 years and say things where we have an article written saying this is where the Flames went wrong and this is why it's embarrassing. So thank you so much, and I will see you on the next episode of Locked On Calgary Flames.
The trade deadline is quickly approaching for the NHL. Who are your Detroit Red Wings' biggest trade pieces this deadline? It's the biggest one's probably Vlad Nemestikov, and I know it hurts. I know. Everybody loves Vlad. Nobody wants to get rid of Vlad. He's become a fan favorite very quickly here. Loves playing for the Detroit Red Wings, does the sweater grab whenever he scores. I get it. It's tough. It's not fun. But he is the one player on your team that if you're going top to bottom, the entire roster, like Brian and I have already started doing on the show, he's the guy that is the easiest to part ways with as far as contract situation and on the ice product. It just makes the most sense. And of the people that it does make the most sense to, he's probably going to get you the biggest return. It's either him or Nick Leddy. And outside of those two guys, you're not talking about too many other expiring contract players that are going to garner you too much of a return. Anything besides that, you're going to have to get rid of a Burt or a Fabry that you just extended, or something that's definitely not going to happen. So of the expiring I know it hurts. I know, but Vlad is going to be the guy that gets you the most. And even he, being the guy that's going to get you the biggest return, is probably not going to get you much more than like a third-ish round pick or a decent prospect in somebody else's organization. You're not going to get top picks. You're not going to get elite level prospects. So it's going to be an interesting deadline for the Red Wings.
What's up? This is Trey Matthews of Locked On Devils, and here is my second trade deadline video. So here are some assets that the New Jersey Devils could possibly give away. The thing is, the Devils are kind of in an interesting situation because they're not really in a position to clear house because, like I previously stated, Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Dougie Hamilton, they're all signed long-term, and those are core pieces for our organization, and I don't think the Devils are going to be stupid enough to trade away Jesper Bratt despite him having a career year. Here's some pieces that they would have available at the trade deadline, but it's not really a lot, so I wouldn't anticipate a high return package. So PK Subban, it's been revealed that Tom Fitzgerald has stated to Subban and his representatives that they will not extend his contract, so they're probably going to be looking to see what they could do at the trade deadline. Most likely the New Jersey Devils are going to have to retain a good chunk of his salary to sweeten the deal a little bit, so PK Subban is available. Obviously, final year of his contract, kind of on the downcline in terms of overall production, so that return package won't relatively be high. Pavel Zacha, wildly inconsistent. Unfortunately, the bar was set too high for him after he was drafted in 2015. He was drafted alongside Connor McDavid, Jack Eichel, Mitch Marner, all those guys, and obviously Zacha has not amounted to that. So Zacha might be on the move. Some names that I've heard that he could be the centerpiece for are like Connor Garland, Brock Besser, players like that. So like I said, more of just like we're trying to move on from Pavel Zacha and see what we could potentially take a risk on, because getting Brock Besser or Connor Garland, despite their solid production, they would still be risk, especially with Connor Garland's contract. So Pavel Zacha might be on the move for the New Jersey Devils. Also, Jimmy Vesey signed to a one-year deal. Originally just was a trial player, made the team, just put some feelers out there, see what we could potentially get for him. And then Damon Severson. Severson is focused more on the offensive side of things when it comes to defensemen. Makes a few boneheaded plays on the defensive side of things, but he's still a solid leader and puts up solid production for a blue line defenseman. So, that could be a name that that the Devils try to see what they can potentially get out of. So in terms of just pieces that we could potentially trade, we don't really have that much on the table. Like I said, we're not really in a position to be sellers, but at the same time, we have some decent pieces that people might be willing to take a risk on. So those are some names I would anticipate the Devils would try to put feelers out and try to move on from.
Hey there, hockey fans. Jared Douglas here, host of Locked On Hurricanes, and the trade deadline is right around the corner. And the Carolina Hurricanes, should they decide to do anything at this deadline, they're going to be buyers. So we got to look at what the Carolina Hurricanes could potentially do at this trade deadline. I think their biggest area of improvement that they could potentially make would be on their blue line. They've had some injuries as of late, and there are two guys that stick out the most for me, and that is Jacob Chychrun with Arizona and John Klingberg with Dallas. These are two guys that stick out the most to me. They've been rumored to be interested in Klingberg for quite some time now, but regardless of what they do and who they pick up, if money's coming in, money's going to have to move out. They only have a little over $1.8 million in cap space. So depending on who they go for, I could see guys like Ethan Bear or Brendan Smith being on the way out. Those have kind of been the two shakiest defensemen that we've had, as well as maybe a bottom type forward, maybe like a Stephen Lawrence. I know a lot of fans won't like that because he is a fan favorite, but he's one I could see being on the move. And should they go for a guy like Chychrun, they're probably going to have to entice it a little bit more, and I could really see maybe a guy like Martin Necas getting shipped off in that regard. Personally, not a huge fan of that move, but if you're going to go for a top level player, you got to move, a high end guy as well. And of course, there are obviously the prospects that could be moved in draft picks. Prospect wise, one that sticks out to me the most is Ryan Suzuki. He's a guy that's kind of struggled with injuries and hasn't developed the way the Hurricanes would like, but time will tell to see what the Carolina Hurricanes end up doing at the trade deadline.
Hey everyone, Hunter Hodes here with the Locked On Penguins podcast. So I know the Penguins definitely are going to be buyers. I mean, when you have Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, and Chris Letang, you are always all in. Again, they're tied for second in the Metropolitan. As of this recording, they've been one of the best teams in hockey this year. But, this is an organization. They don't have a deep prospect pool. That has not been the case for as long as Sid, Gino, and Letang have been here. So something you got to, be more creative. Right. But I think one of their biggest trade chips to go out and get that top six forward that I think they desperately need to put on Evgeny Malkin's line, it's probably their first rounder. And, for other teams, it's probably not the best trade chip because it's going to be a pick in the low to mid to high 20s, heck, even in the low 30s if the Penguins go on to win the Stanley Cup this year. But the Penguins don't have a lot of prospects again in the system. I would say P.O. Joseph, he is definitely NHL ready. If a team wants, a defenseman that they can plug in their top six, he's been lighting up Wilkes-Barre this year. He's just, he's already up right now. He hasn't been playing just because Mark Friedman's been great. But I definitely could see teams maybe targeting him. I think he's definitely a trade chip because from the roster at least. Kasperi Kapanen, could teams maybe want to, see if he can get out of his slump? I would say those are their three biggest trade chips in a deal. If the Penguins wanted to go out and get someone like Brock Besser, Connor Garland, JT Miller, it may cost a little more, but a first round pick, maybe Sam Poulin, if teams maybe want to look at his QMJHL numbers. So my dream scenario, of course, Kasperi Kapanen, maybe Sam Poulin and a first rounder. Heck, if you want to include POJ, that it might be a bit rich for a player, but any one of those four players that I just mentioned are probably going to be in a deal if the Penguins go out and get that top six winger. And again, I think their biggest trade asset is that first round pick. They trade it every year that they are contenders. But for more on the Pittsburgh Penguins trade deadline plans, come follow the shows for @LO_Penguins, and you can find the podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, Seattle hockey fans, Erica Lindsay Ayala, your host of Locked On Kraken. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Kraken your first listen of the day. We're coming up on the NHL trade deadline and talking about our biggest bargaining chip. I mean, it's hard to say, quite honestly. We know that the name that has definitely been circling and cycling around is, of course, Mark Giordano. That being said, is he our biggest bargaining chip and trade chip right now? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. The Seattle Kraken defense, I don't think we can say realistically that anyone on the Seattle Kraken defense has a high stock. Now, of course, Giordano and his reputation precede him, what he's been able to do throughout his career. But really, if you're looking at players, you might want to, although I do think that the Seattle Kraken need some money. I talked about it in that what would that success video look like. I talked about Gio perhaps being one of those people for monetary reasons. I do think success is going to look like getting some more money in the bank to be able to spend for free agency, and that essentially means offloading big contracts. That's where Gio comes in. But you also might want to put into play some of the players that over time you have to think about whether they're the cost benefit. So that's where players like Ryan Donato come into play. It hurts my heart. I do think Donato deserves a chance here, but you got to look at some players like that. I mean, I'm not thinking that we're going to see Schwartz or Eberle leave anytime soon, but what does that mean for maybe a Jared McCann? I think that we have a few players at that mid-level that are probably a little bit more promising to other NHL teams. But right now, I think I have to agree that Donato is looking good as one of those. I think that there is potential to get some good value. It hurts my heart, and I don't think it will be anything because of what Donato was not able to do. I think it's all about the business, but we'll see what happens.
Well, the Nashville Predators might be the key figure for this entire NHL trade deadline. I'm Nick Morgan from Locked On Predators. The reason why is Filip Forsberg. Yeah, nobody really knows what's going to happen to number 9 yet. Filip Forsberg is, of course, an unrestricted free agent at the end of this season, meaning he can go pretty much anywhere he wants this summer. And word around town is that GM David Poile is not too keen on the prospect of losing Forsberg for nothing. There's been some reports over the past little bit that the Predators have reportedly reached out to a couple of teams just to kind of gauge their interests, see what a market for Forsberg might look like. That is going to depend on a lot, though. The Predators, of course, are still in the playoff hunt, and you don't want to give up your best player right as you're trying to fight for a Stanley Cup. That would send the absolute wrong message to the rest of the guys in that locker room. So Poile needs to be very careful about that. But at the same time, there might be a trade out there that both gives the Preds some future prospects for Filip Forsberg and also keeps them stocked up to make a potential run this year. You know, you look at a team like Calgary, who of course is kind of in the same situation. They have a lot of guys who might be gone at the end of the year. Could there be a match between the Flames and Preds? You look at Vegas, a team in cap hell. Same with the Tampa Bay Lightning. They may have some guys they're willing to move to maybe bring in a guy who, yeah, he's an unrestricted free agent, but maybe they're in a better place to make one last run